Good morning. It's a new year, so I'll introduce myself to the 100 new faces in the audience I don't yet know. My name's Lee Perkins, and I teach English. I also went to Brooks, and like you, I sat in these pews, sang hymns, listened to the Rev's words and the music, and tried to get something out of it, though it was not my tradition. For me, the moments that were most meaningful in chapel involved guest speakers who shared their perspectives, and in doing that often broadened mine. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to two guest speakers who I hope will do just that for you. They're not really guests to Brooks, though. Diana Valdes arrived at Brooks in September of 2001 from Santa Ana, California, and graduated in May of 2005. Albert Nascimento came to Brooks from Somerville, Mass. In 2007 and graduated in 2010. They sat where you're sitting. They had the same teachers, coaches, and advisors that you have. They're Brooksians, like you and me. When I read Enrique's journey this summer, though, I realized that I'd already learned much of what was in it from them. Not the small, personal details of Enrique's life, but the huge, looming, terrifying truths of what life as an immigrant can be like, even if you're lucky enough to land in a beautiful, sheltered place like this, as they were. One of the dangers of exploring an issue as enormous as immigration through just one lens is that it's easy to remain distant from it, ignoring the reality that tens of millions of Americans face every day. I'm thrilled that Dee and Bert agreed to come back to campus to share their experiences with you, and hope that as you listen, you can put yourself in their shoes, and in doing so, perhaps bring this issue, which can seem so vast and abstract, a little closer to home. First, please give a warm welcome to Albert Nascimento.
Good morning. Before I start, I just want to get a little disclaimer out there. I'm catching a little bit of a cold, so if my voice cracks, it's because of that, not because I'm nervous. Thank you. Well, it's been 5 years since I've been at the Brooks Chapel, and I have to say it feels good to be back. Although many, if not all of you, will find this hard to believe, chapel was my favorite period on the schedule during my time at Brooks. I also have to admit that besides the amazing guest speakers and senior speeches, my favorite part of the chapel was listening to Mr. Humphreyville play the organ. I remember the last time I stood up on this podium as if it was yesterday. I had just finished my chapel speech, and as I led the line out of chapel, Mr. Humphreyville played my favorite song. The song I had asked him to play every chapel since my freshman year. That song, believe it or not, was the Super Mario theme. After pouring out my heart on the podium, the Super Mario theme was exactly what I needed to hear. And I've never had the opportunity to thank Mr. Humphreyville for that. So, Mr. Humphreyville, thank you very much. It's the small things like this that make Brooks the wonderful place that it is. With the primary presidential debates going on, the topic of immigration is getting hotter by the day. Although Jeb Bush primarily refers to anchor babies in relation to Asian babies, to some, I am also considered an anchor baby. My entire family was born and raised in Brazil. My mother and father, along with his two brothers, decided to come to the United States in 1988 in the pursuit of the American dream. Like Enrique's mother, they were hoping to get a well-paying job and send money back home to Brazil. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. And a few months after being in America, my dad's younger brother was diagnosed with cancer. The next year or so was extremely rough for them, as they fought to find jobs and my uncle battled with cancer. With the spiritual and emotional support of my family from thousands of miles away, my uncle was able to overcome and has been cancer-free since 1989. A year after my uncle was cancer-free, over in the Cambridge Hospital delivery room, my mother dropped her anchor and I was born. I'm glad you guys like that. My stay in America was short, as my parents brought me to Brazil when I turned 1. My parents made a tough decision to leave me in Brazil to be raised by my grandparents while they returned to America to continue working to provide extra support to the family back home. Unfortunately, my parents were never married, and they soon separated, taking their own paths through life. Due to the fact that I've always lived with my father's parents, I was able to develop a strong connection with him. but my connection with my mother has always been extremely rocky. For several years, we only spoke during the holidays, and when I was attending Brooks, we would speak once a year when it was time to fill out financial aid papers. I've lived with my grandparents ever since, and when I turned 10, due to a series of events that are too long to speak about today, we made the journey to America. Now, fortunately for us, my grandparents were able to obtain a 10-year visa, and because I was born in Cambridge, I had an American passport, allowing us three to enter the country legally. This is where our journey begins. I remember sitting in the airplane, pushing the button to call the flight attendants almost every 10 minutes, and when they came, I would just practice the little English I knew and say, "Hi, how are you?" However, when they answered, I had no idea what they were saying, so I would fall back to my favorite word at the time and say, "Juice?" By the end of the flight, I might have single-handedly consumed all the juice in that aircraft. Once we arrived in America, the real challenges began. We moved in with my father and my uncles into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Somerville, Mass. My grandparents took a bedroom, and my father and his brothers took the other, leaving me to sleep on the sofa. Although my father and uncles had lived in America for a few years, their English was still extremely basic. The only jobs they were able to get involved late night or early morning maintenance work, because these were the jobs that required minimum English. I remember joining them Friday and Saturday nights to do late night cleanings of a funeral home, along with various other business buildings they clean. Countless hours scrubbing toilets, cleaning floors, windows, you named it. I've probably cleaned it. I'll never forget the time my curiosity led me to open a casket. This wasn't the first dead body I saw. However, there was something about the way that man's body looked that really spooked me. Needless to say, I never helped him clean a funeral home again. About 6 months after being in America, things took a turn for the worse. My dad was deported back to Brazil, and to this day, I'm not sure why. I simply remember feeling like my world was crushed. My father is an adventurous man. In fact, pretty much everyone in my family has a little bit of the travel bug in them. My father remained back in Brazil for a few years, then returned to America. I remember the first day we were reconnected. My first question to him was, "How long is your visa going to last?" He simply smiled at me and said, "I came through the back door." At the time, I had no idea what that meant, but I would soon find out. A few years later, my father was deported again, this time spending some time in jail before being deported. Once again, a few years went by, and my father magically reappeared. This time, there was something different about him. He wasn't as cheerful as he always was, and by looking into his eyes, I can tell he had experienced something drastic. I was now older and could understand things a little better, so I finally decided to ask, "What happened? How did you get here?" My father began to tell me the story of his journey through Mexico. I then learned that this was my father's third time coming to America through Mexico. I always heard stories about people making the journey and everything that would happen along the way, but I never imagined my father would be part of one of those stories. Although I don't remember the specific cities he went through and the places he visited, I vividly remember the details of the stories he told me. Like Enrique and his mother, my father was part of a large group of immigrants who began their journey to America through Mexico. He was in a group of 12 people. The group was mostly Brazilians, along with a few Mexicans. My father told me stories, but the one that made the biggest impression on me was the river crossing. The group had been walking for a while, about 2 miles or so, and it was around 1 a.m. because they needed the darkness to help them stay out of sight. They came up to a river, and my father began to sweat because, like me, he doesn't know how to swim either and wasn't sure how he would get across. The coyote led the way, tying a rope across the river. His directions were simple: don't let go of the rope. My father began crossing the river, nervously gripping the rope so hard that his forearms started to hurt. Halfway across the river, a woman who was in front of my father with her baby on her shoulder lost grip of the rope. As the current swooped her and her baby, pulling them down the river, my father quickly reacted, grabbing the back of the woman's shirt and held on for dear life. The baby's cries grew louder by the second. Not only did they have the fear of drowning in that river in mind, but now the chances of them getting caught was exponentially growing with every ear-piercing cry let out by the frightened baby. My father was able to pull the woman and her baby back to the rope. However, in doing so, he lost grip of the rope and was swept by the current. He was carried down the river helplessly, trying to grab a hold of something. He was finally able to grab a low-hanging tree branch, and the coyote was able to pull him out of the river. Adding insult to injury, my father lost his bag of clothes and his shoes in the river, and they now had to take a 3-mile trek through pitch-black fields, purely trusting the navigational skills of the coyote. My father was shoeless and traveling with wet clothes. In the end of the 3-mile trek, the bottoms of my father's feet were completely ripped apart, with deep lacerations to the arches of his feet. To make a long story short, my dad eventually made it to Texas, then to Phoenix, then to DC, and finally arrived in Somerville. Although it took him 2 weeks to make it from that dreadful river to Somerville, his feet had yet to heal due to the fact that he was always on the run, trying to stay one step ahead of immigration. I remember cleaning the bottoms of his feet twice a day for about 2 weeks. As I cleaned his cuts with hydrogen peroxide, he would flinch and bite down on the pillow not to scream. Seeing tears come down my father's eyes as I cleaned his cuts really gave me a different perspective on things. That was the moment I realized the extreme sacrifice my father made just to be with me. I made it a point from that day on to work as hard as I could in anything I engaged in. Whether it was getting up at 5 a.m. to work on my basketball skills or simply seeking out extra help on assignments I didn't understand, I always gave it 120% no matter what was going on in my life, because I knew that if my dad was able to complete that journey to America, then I could do anything I set my mind to. I wish I could stand here and tell you that things were perfect from there on. However, about a year later, another roadblock presented itself. My father was once again arrested, and this time spent about a year in jail before he was finally deported. When in jail, my father became very religious and is now currently a pastor in Brazil. I remember receiving a phone call during my 10th birthday party. It was a collect call from the county jail. My father was calling to wish me a happy birthday. We spoke for about 20 minutes, mostly just me rambling on about things I had done recently and about all the cool presents I received. I remember him telling me, "Albert, you have to take care of Grandma and Grandpa because I won't be back anymore." I took on that responsibility willingly and honorably. I was now the one responsible for making sure all paperwork and anything in the house was running fine. At the age of 10, I was helping my uncles fill out work and insurance applications. I helped my family manage and write checks to pay bills because they didn't know how to write in English. When my grandmother wanted to go to the store, I was always by her side in case she had a question about the price of an item. Any and everything relating to or involving English had to go through me before any decision was made. Now keep in mind, I wasn't even a teenager yet, and here I am writing checks. Whew. When I reached 9th grade, I was given the opportunity to come to Brooks. Again, I found myself filling out all the applications, many times wishing I had someone who could help me. The moment I was accepted to Brooks was bittersweet. I was beyond excited for the opportunity, but at the same time crushed that I would be leaving my grandparents. I felt selfish for leaving them behind and wasn't sure how to deal with it. Not a day went by my first year at Brooks that I didn't worry about my grandparents, about the possibility of immigration or customs coming for them without me there to try to protect them. Whenever I took a weekend and went home, my grandmother had a laundry list of tasks for me to do before I left. I wrote several little notes for my grandmother with Portuguese on one side and English on the other. These notes ranged from, "How much is this?" to, "I would like to return this item and get store credit." She didn't speak any English, so she would take these notes to the store with her and hand them to the employees with a smile. I'm sure those employees till this day think she's a mute because she would always use notes and never said a word. The summer after my first year at Brooks, I woke up at 5:30 every day to drive my grandfather to work because he didn't have a license. I would drive from Somerville to Andover, drop him off, and then come to Miss Perkins' house until it was time to pick him up. I'm very grateful that Lee and Matt took me in as one of their own and truly helped change my life. From the bottom of my heart, I love you guys. Mr. McVeigh, words can't describe how grateful I am to have met you. Thank you for always providing a shoulder for me to cry on when needed. I'll try my hardest not to cry right now. You may be wondering, where has my journey taken me since then? Well, through many ups and downs, I graduated from Brooks and then from Middlebury College. All the hard work and dedication and the fear of disappointment of my grandparents pushed me forward, no matter how big the bump in the road. Today, believe it or not, with English as my second language, I am a 9th and 11th grade English teacher, teaching at an all-boys school in Salisbury, Connecticut. Who would have thought a young boy from the slums of Brazil would come to America and achieve all the things I did? To all of you sitting here today, know that anything is possible if you set your mind to it and truly commit yourself. Not just half commit yourself, but truly commit yourself. I will leave you with some of the wisest words I've ever been told, and you can take them as you wish. Are you ready? Go when you can, not when you have to. It might not make sense to you right now, but one day it surely will. Although I was told this in regards to using the bathroom during a religion exam, I've grown to adopt this phrase to life in general. Any chance you have to tell your family you love them, do it, because you never know when things are going to take a turn for the worse. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bert. So I hope that that makes the issue that we've been thinking about in the abstract a little closer to your heart, if it wasn't already. Could you now please let Dee Valdes know how happy we are to have her back on the Brooks campus after 10 years?
Morning. Let me just set up the PowerPoint. I tend to shake, but bear with me when I'm nervous, or as I am right now. Let me see. Oops. We started at the... Lower the microphone. Here we go. So let's take a breath, because I want to be clear when I speak. And, okay. So, I'm illegal, or as I prefer to be called, I'm undocumented, which is also the politically correct way to call someone. And this speech is probably the hardest thing to do, not because I can't speak in public, but because I'm coming out to the entire Brooks community and there's no turning back. Now everybody knows. But I hope it creates a little bit of a positive effect, or a lot. So let me start by saying that life has always been a struggle. My parents split up before I was 2, and it was ugly, as divorces are, but this one was a little bit worse. My father beat up my mom once, and she wouldn't have it, so she left him, but she left me behind. She came back a week later when he was on a business trip, and she kidnapped me. You might ask why. Well, you see, my dad was a criminal defense attorney, and he had the money and the influences, so when my mother tried to go to the authorities, they wouldn't file the police report for her, and my father wouldn't let her see me. They each kidnapped me about 3 times, and until my mother saw no other choice, she resorted to fleeing the country with me. And that's the reason that I only have one childhood picture. We left with what I had on my back, what I was wearing. So there it is. That's all I knew of me. I looked like a boy. Anyways. My grandmother had come to the U.S. a year before, and she paid $1,000 for someone to smuggle my mom, my uncle, and myself across the border in California and Mexico in a van with no seats and 22 other immigrants. Inside, we slept one night in the desert where my mother and dad, my uncle, who I call dad, held hands and slept with me in the middle so that no animals would get me. We had to wait for the right time to cross the border and so on. So we were delivered in Laguna Hills to my grandma, who worked as a nanny, and my mom eventually inherited the job when my grandma got another one. She worked from Sunday at 7 p.m. to Sunday at 7 a.m. So basically, she was allowed to go to church and out on Sundays as a live-in nanny housekeeper for $75 a week. I mean, they justified the pay because I got to live with her. So after 2 years, we returned to Mexico, and although my mother had a full-time job, she couldn't make ends meet, so she decided to return to the U.S. But she knew she wouldn't be able to save any money with me if she brought me with her, so she left me behind and got herself a student visa. She wouldn't cross the border again like that. I was 5 years old, and she left me in the care of her sister. And she would call me twice a month using a $5 calling card. So when the card would drop the call, she couldn't call me back because the card had used up the funds. She sent money that paid for birthday parties and nice dresses. You know, the fashion was a little different back then. But I didn't want the parties, and I didn't want the dresses. I wanted my mom. After 2 years, she arranged to have me get a tourist visa and brought me with her. I had to relearn English, and I thrived in school, even though it was now my second language. And every day I pledged allegiance to the U.S. flag. I learned U.S. history and integrated into the culture. At 8 years old, my mother remarried, and my stepdad didn't like me. So that starts another struggle. To escape being at home, I spent all the time I could at school. I would sign up for everything, like Saturday Math Academy, count me in. Sunday computer school, I can do it. After school academic clubs, sports teams, anything to keep me from being home. I knew my only way out was school. This turned out to be a blessing because I was such a perfect, well-rounded student, I qualified to apply to a Better Chance, which is an organization that connects kids from high-risk neighborhoods who wouldn't have the opportunity with top prep schools. And although I knew my immigration status might disqualify me from it, I still applied. You know, I was smart. St. Mark's accepted me over the phone. They were like, we want her. But then they said, oh, wait, she's missing something. And then when they asked for my Social Security, we said it was in progress on the application. And they're like, no, we kind of need it. So thankfully, Brooks accepted me and offered me a full ride. And I was trying to get away from my alcoholic stepdad, who once in a while would beat me. And so I took the golden ticket, came from California to North Andover, Massachusetts. At 14, 2 days before 9/11, my mother dropped me off at Brooks and returned to California. Here I was, not only going through culture shock, but having a secret I couldn't share. What would people do if they found out? What would my coaches, my teachers, my friends, my dorm parents, their parents, I mean, what would they say if they found out? Would they still like me? Even today, I'm afraid of what these faculty who knew me back then will think of me after this speech. Like, I hope you guys still love me and like me. I was ashamed. Not having done anything myself, I kept my secret inside, and inside the Brooks bubble, I got involved in sports, extracurriculars, because like you, I was trying to get into the best college possible. I played many sports, cross country, soccer, sailing. I did ice hockey. I coxed on the boys' crew team. And with Mr. Ulrich and Mr. Palm as my coaches, I did very well. I even won a silver medal in New England. And I was very proud. I also joined robotics, and I was the first girl to win a competition at Brooks, and beat Mr. Burbank, coming in second place in the finals. I kept my secret for as long as I could, even when two of my classmates, while sitting in the senior section, said, "We should have a holiday when we go down to the border and we shoot anyone trying to get in." And I was like, oh man, if they only knew. Like, would they shoot me? Would they ask for me to be expelled because I was undocumented? And I was already a senior here, so I had kept my secret for 4 years. Or actually, I hadn't, but we'll go into that. So to that point, think twice before you say something. You never know who you might hurt. Somebody might have a family member, or it might be themselves that you're offending. So just think that your words have the power of really hurting somebody. So when fifth form year came, I knew I was not going to be able to keep my secret much longer. My immigration status was, of course, going to be an issue when I applied to college. The first person I came out was to my advisor, then to my best friend, then to the college counselors, because they had to know, and then they told the headmaster, and then a couple of faculty members. I didn't want anybody else to know. It was still something I was very ashamed of. I applied early to Stanford as an international student, but after finding out that they only have financial aid available for 10 international students, I withdrew my application. I mean, I knew I was smart and good, but not that good. So, and other schools do not accept anyone who's undocumented. So although I had the grades and the scores, I could not apply. Everyone expected me to go to college. I graduated cum laude with distinction in Latin and mathematics. You know, I did well for myself. But out of all the graduates, even though I graduated cum laude, I was the only one not going anywhere or knowing where I was going to go, what would happen to me. And then this brings me to my other point. Just like me, every year, 65,000 students who were brought to the U.S. as minors without anyone asking them. It's not like you ask a 3-year-old, hey, want to come? They graduate each year and come onto this limbo. And some students, they don't find out until it's time to get a license or apply to college. Their parents pull them to the side and say, hey, you know, or they ask, can I have my social security number? And they go, well, we have to have a talk. So these kids think of themselves as Americans. Like I said, we pledge allegiance to the flag every day, and then they find out they're not. So instead of, you know, crying about it, I started working, and I joined a weekend course put together by Better Chance and Goldman Sachs, where they taught us how to put together a business plan. My plan won the Northeastern Regionals, and I was invited to the national competition. But as you can imagine, this was not what I wanted. And there's my picture. They came to the competition in New York. As you can imagine, this wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want a certificate like that. I wanted to go to college, but I couldn't. So I came home to California. I talked to an immigration attorney to see what I could do, but there was nothing. I didn't qualify for relief, but I still wanted to do things right, and I didn't take the easy way out, like get into a fake marriage for a green card or lie about my immigration status to colleges so I can get the benefits. I would wait for the laws to change and work very hard, and again, I wanted to do things right. Which brings me to my next point, and one that I like to take a minute to explain, because people say immigrants don't pay taxes, right? So I've been paying taxes since I graduated, 2005. And you might ask, how? You know, well, it's actually really simple. You apply for a tax ID number, and this number isn't valid for employment purposes, but lets you file a tax return. And even those that don't file a tax return, when they work using a fake social security number, taxes get taken out automatically every paycheck. But, so we do pay taxes. And those that don't file a tax return, in reality, are leaving whatever might have been returned to them as a tax refund in Uncle Sam's treasure chest. So these are millions and millions of dollars that go unclaimed. They're just there because nobody filed anything. Now that I made that point, I want to go back to the college. When I came back to California, I tried looking into the UCs and the Cal States, right? But coming to Brooks actually hurt me. I thought I had this golden ticket that was going to get me into the best colleges possible. But UCs are very hard to get out of high school. And my honors average was still just an 87.5 to them. It wasn't an A average, so they weren't going to look at me. The doors eventually opened at Santa Ana College, the local community college, and I'll explain why I say the doors opened in a minute. But there I completed my general ed requirement, and through their honors program, I gained acceptance to UC Berkeley, UC Santa Barbara, and UCLA to their political science program. I had been awarded 5 scholarships for a total of $6,000. Now remember, I don't qualify for any financial aid, any grants, any loans. Like, I have to pay cash up front. Also, because I came to Brooks, I didn't qualify for the California DREAM Act, which allows you to pay in-state tuition if you went to a high school in California. But I didn't. So I punched myself in the face by coming here. And so, hold on, let me get back. Because I came to Brooks, now my eligibility, which would have been signing that document that says California non-resident tuition exemption request, I didn't qualify. And all of a sudden, my tuition went from $13,251, and you had to add the out-of-state tuition or extra of $24,000, $708. Using my savings and my scholarship money, I enrolled at UCLA part-time so that I could get my name in and then try to finish little by little, saving all my money. I worked many jobs, some more odd and some more cooler than most people, like being a professional photographer or the Hellsman's Mayo. I'm the person inside. And then to the students that I took the picture of yesterday at the green station at the color run, I bet you guys didn't know you were getting your picture taken by a professional LA photographer. I worked 2 jobs and went to school, but always in fear of being pulled over or having my car impounded for 30 days for not having a license. And now, in California, there is public transportation, but it's not the best. So I had no choice but to read the DMV book, pray and hope I didn't get pulled over, and go to work and go to school. And then, in 2012, President Obama, seeing that there would be no agreement in Congress, signed an executive order granting deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA for short. They had a couple of requirements that you had to meet, all of them. You had to be under the age of 31 as of June 15, 2012, come to the U.S. before 16, had been residing in the U.S. for the last 5 years, graduated or were going to graduate from a high school in the U.S., and have a clean criminal record. Therefore, I needed to behave my entire life or I would be disqualified. So you qualified for a work permit for 2 years, not valid for reentry, which means you can be in the U.S., but you can't leave, because if you leave, you're not allowed to come back in. Now, having DACA gave me the relief, the work permit, and social security number that I had been asking for. And this allowed me to first work at an immigration law firm where I would help people get documents, which is ironic because I couldn't get them myself, but I still help people. After a year there, I got a job at an ad agency and production company in downtown LA. I started as an admin assistant to the owner and agent, and now I'm the account manager for the bigger accounts. Ironically, one of our biggest accounts is IDT, which is a company that we do the West Coast media buying and event coordination for their phone app, that for $5, it allows you to call unlimited to Mexico. If only my mother had that plan, you know? It's okay, my grandma has it. Also, I want to say that if DACA is repealed by the next president, the 643,000 that have benefited from this will now go back to being undocumented and we'll all be fired from our jobs. So my job is pretty cool, but when my 10-year reunion came, I wanted to come. I mean, I wanted to see everybody, but I was hesitant at first. I didn't know how I would answer the question of, what if my classmates found out? You know, none of them really knew. Or what would they say to the fact that I still haven't finished college? Thankfully, that's the 5-year reunion question, you know, where'd you go to college? And reunion was amazing. Everybody was nice, but only my best friend knew all about myself. So until today, none of my classmates had a way of knowing, and now they do, because it's being recorded. And I want to finish by saying that although I'm not where my classmates are, because they are all done with college, some have master's or law degrees, I'll catch up. But I also want to say that it's easy to demonize an immigrant and blame us for problems in the country. But if we were all bad and we were all criminals, wouldn't we have chosen the easy way out, like marrying for papers or getting fake papers to get real papers? I mean, the ways are there, but we have a moral compass. So instead, we work harder than others. We do jobs others wouldn't. And because we have the hope of one day qualifying for an immigration reform, we pay our taxes and we keep clean criminal records, because those two are going to be the major requirements. And we know that. So we walk the straightest line we can. So when you look at the subject and immigration, please don't dehumanize it. It could be your neighbor, your nanny, or even your classmate. So in closing, I want to say thank you to the Brooks community for having me here to tell you about my journey, to my little sister for helping me with the presentation, my family for their love and support, my boss for giving me the time off, and a very, very special thanks to Ms. Perkins.